Hello and welcome to another Frontend Engineering Explained. In this one we're going to look at a pretty simple layout, but there's a couple of nice things I want to touch on in this one. So let's start out with just the HTML. So we've got a H1, we've got an article that's our parent container, then we have two unordered lists inside that are our nested containers, and then each of these has this one has 3 children and this one has 1. Then we have some basic CSS here, just opting into border box for our box sizing, some basic system fonts, and then just our classic reset list, which basically just turns off, as if you've watched other videos, as you would know by now, it just turns off the list style and the margin and padding. So nothing fancy. So all this gives us in the browser is just this. What we want to do is we want to turn this into a layout that looks something like this. And yes, this is Penpot, not Figma. If you watch my previous video, that would make sense to you. Okay, so some interesting things here. So first of all, the borders aren't that interesting. They're merely there to show the parent-child relationship. So of course, this is our parent, this is our container that's inside, and then these would be our list items. But the interesting things here is, for example, in this one, you can see we have one item and it's light blue. And then in here, we have 3 items and they go from purple to hot pink back to purple, or Rebecca purple to be exact. And so how are we going to achieve this? So one of the challenges that used to be back in the day is if you, for example, have a container that could have 1 or more items in it, but you wanted the same spacing between them. Oftentimes it would be tricky, especially before we had the nth selector, nth as an nth. But even with that, it was easier because you could use that to, for example, say nth child blah, turn off the bottom margin or something like that. There's a thing, margin trim, that on the WebKit blog you can read about, but we can avoid all of that by starting with using grid. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give our parent and then our nested containers, we're going to give both of them grid layouts. So let's start with that, and we'll start right here. So we'll do container parent and container, and both of these we're going to set to display grid, and then we're going to give it a gap of 1 rem, and we'll give it a little bit of padding of 1 rem. Okay, so now let's switch back to our browser, and so now we can see we're starting to see a resemblance, or a semblance, I think it's that, of the layout. Of course, we want to give it some borders so we can actually see those. So let's do that. Border 0.2 rem solid, and let's go with Rebecca purple. Nice. So now if we switch back to Penpot, we can see we have our parent-child happening here. And as you can see, the nice thing here is we can just assign them to both. And so now our container parent and our container is just doing the same layout, just a little bit of CSS and we're there. Nice. Okay. So if we think about this, if we ignore the top container that has these zebra stripe, Rebecca purple, hot pink, alternate colors, and we think about the fact that if there's only one item, we want blue. So maybe what we can do is just by default make them all light blue. Okay, so that means that our child, so dot child background color light, I think a light sky blue, something like that. So let's switch back here. Okay. Now we want to add a little bit of padding here. So let's give it also 1 rem of padding. All right. So I reckon we're very close. Now our challenge is our top container. So what we want to do with our CSS is somehow tell it that as soon as there's 2 or more items in our child, no, not our child, sorry, our container, but not our container parent, our container, we can even call it container child. Let's just leave it like that. As soon as there's 2 or more, we want to change the styling. When would you ever need this? Oh, believe me. There are some really interesting design things you sometimes have to implement, having built websites for a long time. I've encountered all kinds of interesting situations, and the more of these tricks and things you have in your tool belt, the happier you're going to be. And also you can do some really cool creative things with this. Coming back to it, so how will we solve this? Well, we have a couple of nice things. So first thing is we have a sibling selector. So you have to think about a sibling different than a nest. So by default, you always, if you put a class name and then a space and another class name, then you're saying if this one is inside this one. So if it's a descendant of this one. So the child is a descendant of the parent. So if we look here, container here is a descendant of container parent. So we're not interested in descendant because, for example, for our child, the descendant would be an H2. What we're interested in is the one next door, the neighbor, so to speak. And what that is called is a sibling. So we want to select siblings. And we do have a sibling selector in CSS, and it's the plus sign. So what we can do is we can use that, plus we use the has selector. And essentially what we want to say is kind of like, because CSS is a programming language, don't let anybody else tell you differently, especially seeing that we're also getting functions and if, and now we're actually doing an if here already, even before we have the if function syntax, because we're basically going to tell it if a container has a child followed by another child, then we want to do some stuff, right? And that is an if condition. We're saying if a container has a child followed by a child, do stuff. Otherwise, don't do stuff. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. So we're going to say container, right? Not container parent. We want to just target those inside ones. Has child plus, because that is our sibling selector, child. So we're saying if our container has a child followed by a child, now we want to do some stuff. And what do we want to do? We want to set all our odd children to Rebecca purple and all our even children to hot pink. Okay, so we're going to say dot child nth child odd. And then our odd ones, we want to make the background color Rebecca purple. And to ensure we have proper contrast for these, we want to set our foreground color to white. And then for our nth child even, we want to set our background color to hot pink. What did I do wrong? Ooh, I must spell even correctly. There we go. So now our odd is Rebecca purple with white, and our evens is hot pink. And that's exactly what we were after. So with just this little bit of CSS, we've achieved our layout there. And now if we add, for example here, if we add player 4, player 4, go back, you see our striping continues. And if we, just to prove it here, if we here change this into 2 instead of the 1 row, so you can see there's no cheating here, there we go. And if we now delete our player 2 again, we're back to our light sky blue. Cool. I hope you found this interesting. I hope this opens up and gets the creative juices flowing a little bit with what you can do with these combinations of like conditionally applying CSS based on what is inside a container to make really cool layouts and really interesting designs. I would look forward to see what you've done with it. So please, if you made anything, CodePen, anything on GitHub, a live website, anything like that, please share it in the comments. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to see more content like this, subscribe and be sure to never miss a video. And until the next one, keep making the web awesome and peace.